Before anything was formed, before even silence had a name, there was only the endless void, deep, unbroken, infinite. No stars burned, no wind moved, no time passed. Yet within that vast emptiness, something stirred. A faint glow, like a distant ember behind ancient stone, pulsed softly, as though existence itself was preparing to breathe. The darkness was not empty, not truly. It was waiting with a patience older than time itself, holding within it the promise of everything that would ever be. And in that sacred stillness, beyond what mortal minds had ever grasped, the first record began, not written in ink nor carved into stone, but formed in light, living, shifting, eternal. Within a realm untouched by decay or time, there existed a vast archive. Endless corridors stretched beyond sight, their walls formed from celestial stone, embedded with glowing crystals that pulse like distant stars. Each crystal held memory, moments that had been, moments that were, and moments yet to come. It was not simply a place of knowledge. It was a memory of creation itself. And at the center of it all sat Ramiel, the ancient scribe. Tall and still, his presence carried a quiet gravity. His glowing silver eyes reflected not just light, but understanding, deep, immeasurable understanding. His hands moved with deliberate precision as he guided a crystalline stylus across floating shards of radiant crystal. Every mark he made became truth. Every symbol, a fragment of existence sealed into eternity. He did not create the story. He recorded it. And yet, even in that role, there was a burden, because to witness everything was to carry everything. Around him, the archive breathed with subtle life. Light shifted gently across surfaces. Dust-like particles drifted in slow motion, and distant echoes of movement whispered to the endless halls. Celestial beings moved with purpose, messengers of light, observers of balance, healers of unseen wounds. Each one carried a role, a function within the grand design. But among them, there were some who lingered longer than they should. The Watchers. They stood at the edges of heaven, with a radiant light of the divine softened just enough to reveal what lay below. Through that veil, they saw the earth, not as it was meant to be recorded, but as it was lived. And what they saw changed them. Far below, the world unfolded in fragile beauty. Humans moved across the land, small and fleeting, their lives brief like sparks in the night. Yet within those brief lives burned something extraordinary. They loved without certainty. They struggled without guarantee. They endured without promise. A man rebuilt his shelter after it was torn apart by storm after storm, never knowing if it would stand the next night. A woman held her child close beside a flickering fire, whispering comfort into the cold darkness. A group gathered not because they were commanded, but because they chose to be together. There was pain, but there was also meaning, and that meaning stirred something dangerous. Semjaza stood among the Watchers, his presence commanding, his gaze fixed on the earth with an intensity that went beyond curiosity. He was not simply observing. He was feeling. He saw humanity not as fragile, but as unfinished. And in that realization, a thought began to take root. What if they could help? What if they could give humanity more knowledge, more strength, more understanding? What if they could lift them beyond suffering? It began as a quiet idea. But ideas, when shared, have a way of growing. The Watchers began to speak among themselves. At first, there was hesitation. They understood the boundary. They knew the separation between heaven and earth was not without reason. But the more they watched, the more that boundary began to feel unnecessary. Why should such beauty remain so limited? Why should such potential remain so fragile? Semjaza stepped forward. His voice was steady, but beneath it carried a fire that could not be ignored. He spoke not of rebellion, but of purpose, not of disobedience, but of compassion. He framed their desire not as defiance, but as something righteous. And slowly, one by one, the others began to agree, until agreement became unity, and unity became decision. On a mountain that rose above the clouds, where the air itself seemed to tremble with unseen energy, they gathered. 200 Watchers, radiant in form, powerful beyond human comprehension. The sky above churned with storm, dark clouds swirling as though the heavens themselves felt what was about to take place. They formed a circle, and in that circle, they made a vow. Hands were raised, and as they were, threads of light emerged, connecting each one to the other. It was not just an oath of words. It was a binding, a shared fate, a point of no return. The moment the oath was sealed, something shifted. Far away, within the endless archive, Ramiel stopped writing. For the first time in ages, his hand paused mid-motion. The crystals around him flickered. The steady glow that had never wavered now trembled, as if disturbed by a force that could not be contained. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, creeping into spaces that had never known darkness. Before him, a new record began to form. He did not write it. It wrote itself. Forbidden descent. Ramiel's expression did not change, but something in his gaze deepened. He understood what this meant. Not just the act, but the consequence. Because some actions do not simply happen. They echo, and the echo had already begun. The Watchers descended, not in chaos, not in violence, but in terrible, beautiful grace. They moved like falling stars, their radiant forms cutting through the boundary between realms. Light bent and tore as they passed through it, the fabric of separation resisting, but ultimately yielding. When they reached the earth, everything changed. At first, humanity trembled. The Watchers were too radiant, too perfect, too other. Their presence overwhelmed the senses. Fear spread quickly, but fear is fragile in the presence of wonder, and the Watchers did not come with wrath. They came with gifts. Azazel stepped forward, his sharp gaze filled with purpose. He showed humans how to draw fire from stone, how to shape metal from the earth. Sparks filled the air as molten metal was transformed into tools, into blades, into instruments of power. What began as creation carried the seed of destruction. Others revealed the movements of the stars, teaching humans to read the heavens as though they were a map. Constellations became guides. Time became measurable. The unknown became known. But knowledge is never neutral. It changes those who receive it. Humanity began to shift. Strength grew. Understanding deepened. But so did ambition. So did desire. And from that change, something unprecedented emerged. The Nephilim. They were vast, towering beings, born from a union that was never meant to exist. Their presence shook the earth beneath them, their forms both magnificent and unnatural. At first, they inspired awe. They stood like living monuments, their strength unmatched, their presence undeniable. But it quickly became clear they did not belong. They grew rapidly. Their hunger was endless, their needs overwhelming. The earth, once abundant, could not sustain them. Fields were consumed, resources vanished, and slowly their nature changed. What began as existence became dominance. What began as presence became destruction. Villages fell under their weight. Humanity, once curious and hopeful, now scattered in fear. The Watchers, who had once descended with purpose, now stood amidst a world they no longer fully understood. The balance had been broken, and the earth felt it. The ground cracked in places, faint light seeping through as though something beneath it was trying to escape. Rivers darkened. The air itself carried a heaviness, a sorrow that could not be spoken but could be felt in every breath. It was as if creation itself was mourning, and that mourning rose. It moved beyond the physical world, beyond the sky, beyond the boundaries of human perception. It ascended into the higher realms, carrying with it the weight of everything that had gone wrong, until it reached the throne. There, in a presence beyond form, beyond comprehension, judgment was declared, not in anger, not in chaos, but in absolute, unshakable authority. The Watchers would be bound, the Nephilim would fall, and the world would be cleansed. Back in the archive, Ramiel wrote. Each word carried weight. Each symbol etched into the crystal felt heavier than the last. The light around him dimmed slightly, not fading, but deepening, like a flame that had witnessed too much. He recorded the fall of the Watchers as they were cast into the depths beneath the earth, bound not by chains of iron, but by divine light itself. He wrote of Semjaza, once filled with conviction, now silent, his radiance dimmed, his expression no longer defiant but reflective. He wrote of Noah, a man unlike the others, not stronger, not wiser in the ways of power, but steady, obedient, unwavering in a world that had lost its direction. He wrote of the ark, of the long days of construction under a sky that had not yet revealed what was coming, of the quiet endurance in the face of disbelief and mockery. And then the rain began, soft at first, gentle, almost ordinary. Drops fell onto the earth, onto trees, onto rooftops, onto skin. It was not yet a warning, but it did not stop. The sky darkened, the clouds thickened, and then the heavens opened. Water fell without pause, and from beneath the earth it answered. The deep broke open. Water surged upward as it poured downward. The balance of the world collapsed under the force of it. Land disappeared. Structures vanished. The familiar became unrecognizable. Mountains were swallowed. Valleys became oceans. The noise of life was overtaken by the relentless roar of water, and in the midst of it all, the ark remained, small against the endless expanse, but unbroken. Inside, there was no celebration, no triumph, only silence, only the quiet understanding that everything that had been was gone. Noah sat in the dim light, the sound of rain echoing against the wood around him. His face carried no confusion, only weight, only knowing. Days passed, then more, until time itself seemed to dissolve into the endless rhythm of water. And then it stopped. The rain ceased. The sky grew still. The waters, once raging, began to recede. Slowly, silently, the world emerged again, but it was not the same. It was clean, empty, untouched by what had come before. A dove was sent. It returned with nothing, then again, until finally it returned with a small branch, a single sign, life, beginning again. Noah stepped onto the earth, his foot pressing into soil that had been washed clean of every memory that once covered it. He stood in silence, looking across a world that felt both new and impossibly heavy. He built an altar, not out of command, but out of recognition. And in response, the sky changed. A rainbow stretched across the heavens, its colors cutting through the gray, a sign not just of promise, but of remembrance. But even in that moment of beauty, there was something unspoken lingering beneath it, memory, because the world may have been washed clean, but the record was not erased. Back within the archive, the light did not return to what it once was. It became something deeper, something quieter, something that carried weight without losing its purpose. The crystals still glowed, but their light felt aware. Ramiel remained at his place, unmoving, unchanging, yet not untouched. He looked upon the sealed record of the flood, the light within it steady, complete. But completion did not mean an ending. It only marked a transition, a closing of one chapter before the next inevitably began. He lifted his stylus once more, and as he did, something subtle shifted. The archive itself seemed to respond. New spaces formed within the endless structure. New record began to take shape. Faint at first, like distant stars just beginning to appear in a darkening sky. The silence that followed the flood was not empty. It was filled with potential. Below, on the earth reborn, movement slowly returned. Small at first, careful, measured, the sons of Noah stepped forward into a world that no longer carried the noise of what came before. Their footsteps marked the beginning of something new, something fragile once again. They spoke, they planned, they began. Simple actions, planting, building, learning. The rhythm of life returning, but different now. Quieter, more aware. The animals moved across the land, no longer driven by fear, but by instinct alone. The wind carried no cries of war, only the sound of open space waiting to be filled. And yet, unseen, the consequences of what had happened still lingered, not in the land, not in the sky, but in the story, because what had been done had been recorded, and what is recorded is remembered. Far beneath the earth, in places untouched by light, the fallen watchers remained, bound in stillness, their radiance dim but not extinguished. Time moved differently there, heavy and unyielding. For them, there was no rebuilding. No renewal, only reflection. Semjaza stood among them, no longer the voice of conviction, but a presence of silence. His gaze no longer reached toward the earth, but inward, toward the weight of what had been set in motion. And above it all, the archive endured. Ramiel wrote, not with haste, not with hesitation, but with certainty. Every moment, every choice, every consequence, etched into the eternal structure of existence. The story continued, not because it was commanded, but because it could not stop. And as one final entry of that age settled into its place, the light sealed gently over it. For a brief moment, there was stillness. Then quietly, another record began, faint, unformed, waiting. Because the story of creation is not a single moment. It is a continuum, an unfolding, an eternal progression of choice, consequence, and renewal. And Ramiel, the silent scribe, remained exactly where he had always been, watching, recording, remembering, as the next chapter began. And beyond that beginning, beyond the quiet footsteps pressing into unfamiliar soil, beyond the slow, steady rhythm of lives learning how to exist again, something lingered. Not a voice, not a command, a question. It was never spoken, yet it echoed through every moment, carried in every breath, hidden in every choice yet to be made. Would the story unfold differently, or would it bend, once more, to the same unseen currents that shaped all that came before? The wind offered no answer. The sky remained still, but the silence was not empty, because even now, the archive waited, not as a force that dictates, but as a witness prepared to receive, to hold what is chosen, to remember what is lived, to bear the weight of decisions that no record could ever make on its own, for the power was never in the record itself. It never was. It has always belonged to those who walk within the story, to the fragile, defiant act of choosing again and again what will be written into existence. And so the silence after the storm did not mark an ending. It became a pause, a fragile, trembling space between what has been and what might yet be, a space heavy with memory and alive with possibility, because everything that was still remains, and everything that will be is waiting, waiting to be chosen, waiting to become. And somewhere beyond sight, the scribe watches still, not to decide, but to understand, as the unfolding story breathes forward into eternity. Thank you for watching. For more stories like this, subscribe to Deep Bible Chronicles. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Like, share, and be part of the story as it continues.